SA Crypto, South Africa's largest blockchain community and news outlet.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this edition of the SA Crypto podcast. We are here today with Warren Gray. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Warren is the co-founder of BlockStarters and CoinEd. I was just asking you off mic, how do you introduce yourself to people when they say, so what do you do, Warren?
I generally quite try and keep it generic. So I say I'm into Bitcoin and blockchain. And then if they probe a little bit further, then I'll go on to say that I kind of co-founded a blockchain education business, which is called CoinEd, as well as a blockchain technology hub, which is called BlockStarters.
So BlockStarters is quite popular, certainly in the crypto industry here in South Africa. A lot of people know who you are because of the events that you've held, the meetups that you've held. But CoinEd as well is something that was founded by yourself and Creon, who founded BlockStarters. Where do you spend most of your time?
CoinEd, I think, is my focus at the moment. So we've just found that, we initially tried to go after individuals to teach people about cryptocurrency, but we found that the market is actually more in schools and developer training for corporates, which has been quite interesting to explore. I mean, I think one would assume that there's a huge market for training individuals, but I mean, the way I've kind of grown to see it is that we're on the one end of an information asymmetry gap, where the reason that cryptocurrency is very lucrative now, the reason that we think it's going to be a very important industry for the future, is because most people don't actually see that. And so when you're trying to give courses to the public, then you're on the wrong end of that, which is you're trying to sell something that needs a lot of convincing. So we've actually found that to be the more difficult angle. But then the developer training is very interesting. So we do Solidity, blockchain, smart contract, dev training, run hackathons. But the one that's been quite rewarding and the most interesting, I think, is in the schools. It's provided a very interesting perspective, and we've trained a lot of students at schools. So hopefully the next generation who can use the technology the same way you and I use the internet today.
So one reason why I wanted to do this podcast and this interview is because I saw that you did quite a big training in Kenya. And that was very interesting to see such young people being taught about blockchain. Most adults and even software engineers, I talk to software engineers, developers, people in the IT industry who have no clue about the blockchain industry and what blockchain even is yet. And that surprises me. How, first of all, let's start with how you got that opportunity. Here's a South African startup in an industry that is so niche, so unique, and you're getting invited to schools in Kenya. Tell us how the opportunity arose.
So, I mean, the school we went to teach there was the Crawford in Kenya. And I think we initially, through the Advotech group, which owns Crawford, one of their board members, Stafford Massey, who used to be the CEO of Google in South Africa. He's a board member there, and I think he saw early on that it's very important. So from very high level, there was directive within the Advotech group to get blockchain and Bitcoin education into certainly their ventures, and Crawford is one of them. So it was a bit more difficult to introduce in the South African schools because there's obviously a lot more structure. Schools are usually well planned out for the year, and it's difficult to get time in there. So the obvious next step was to go to Kenya, where there's a school that's just launched, which is Crawford International School. It's actually kind of a separate branch. And in Nairobi, they just started their school. They don't have the same rigid requirements as what we have in South Africa in terms of examinations, etc. So it was quite easy to slot in with a full 2-week integration into the syllabus. To our knowledge, it's actually the first in the world where there's been a full integration into a high school, from what we can tell. We haven't seen any evidence to suggest otherwise.
Wow.
And it gave us a huge amount of time with students from the age of, I think, 12, 13 up to about 17. And also in a country that has a different context around money to us, which is also interesting to see.
Why do you say they have a different context to money?
So there's a few things. One of them is that they have majoritively using digital money in the form of their M-Pesa.
Right. So is that still a big form of trade and part of their economy in Kenya?
Yeah, I think from what we could tell, most people's transactions actually work like that. Students will mostly use M-Pesa, and also the culture around having money as a child is quite different. So I think here there's, pocket money is a norm, and allowances, etc., or getting money to buy things. There it seems to be on a very permissioned basis. So for example, when the boarders get taken to the movies on the weekend, the teachers told us that when they go out there, every single one of them will have to, on the spot, request M-Pesa and then spend it right there. So they have this kind of, from the student's perspective, quite a frustrating permissioned system.
Right.
And so that's always when they first see cryptocurrency, their eyes light up, because the questions are like, well, can we have a Bitcoin wallet if we're under 18? And the obvious answer is...
Are they not allowed M-Pesa wallets under 18?
Well, to have an account, you have to sign up. You have to have a bank account, right? In order to use it, you need to have your parents' permission, and they can't really get hold of it.
Okay,
So even
it's
if
extremely limited and restricted. I mean, it's properly regulated.
It's like any bank account. I mean,
Right.
So when we teach in South Africa, we get the same response, and that's actually what's made it so interesting is pupils really get it quickly because they have a direct need, whereas the usual reply with the public. Adults in the public is that, well, I have already got a bank account, I can already spend it quite easy. So they don't really have that permissionless lesson in there.
Interesting. Okay, so you're dealing with an economy that is already fully operational on their phones. M-Pesa is a big part of Kenya's economy.
Yeah, and there's a big remittance market as well. So when we ask how many of your parents have used cryptocurrency, usually it's about a quarter to a third of the students put up their hands. And then usually the answer is, well, they used it to send money back to America or whatever the case may be. Or they used to receive money from some diaspora.
Sure.
Whereas in South Africa, when you ask that question, usually the number of students who put up their hands is far less, and it's always for speculative reasons. There isn't really that remittance market within the group that we're teaching.
All right, so now you spent 2 weeks teaching high school students. Were they a whole range of students? Were you teaching the different grades, the different sort of years? And how on earth did you integrate into their actual syllabus? I mean, that must have been a very challenging project to manage.
Yeah, so I think the range was a number of years. Because it's a new school, they had students from all kinds of schools. So there was a big range of skills, which is something we don't see here because there's quite an established schooling system. You're most likely in South Africa going to go to a certain tier of school your whole life. Whereas there's a huge or undersupply of schooling, a huge amount of demand. They spend a tremendous amount of their income on education. And
the people or the government?
The parents.
Okay.
Yeah, they're willing to spend. I mean, I've heard different numbers, but some of the teachers suggested that they're willing to spend up to half of their income, or a third to half of their income, on education for their children. So it is quite a different view of it.
And is that the middle class, or is that sort of the lower end of the middle class?
I think it's across the spectrum there is a desire for education.
Interesting.
Obviously, I think, and it's quite a federated system where you have very expensive private schools, like exceedingly expensive, like Harvard,
Sure.
300,000 rand a year kind of thing. And they're usually the international schools, and then you have on the other end of the spectrum kind of government schools, very cheap or very low cost schools. And that's what's been interesting with Crawford. They've introduced a value proposition at the international school level, but at a price point that's similar to a South African private school, which is a fifth of the price or less than the existing private schools there. So they've disrupted it a bit, and that's why there's so much demand. So now you have students coming to that school that previously went to a government school, and you can tell there is quite a range of backgrounds in terms of what they've learned to date. But it's nice that it's kind of early high school, so I think that'll be normalized quite quickly.
So coming back to the students that you taught, each class that you taught, was it a different grade, or was it an amalgamation of grades each time? And how many classes were you doing per day?
Yes, we did a full day every day. I think I developed an appreciation for how hard teachers work.
Wow.
Because there were two of us, Kriyan and I, giving the courses. And even though we could kind of bounce off each other and share the workload, by the end of the day it was time to take a nap. And we didn't even have any marking to do. But the way we integrated, we did grades, each grade at a time. And it wasn't that we took over their maths lesson and taught maths, but it was that we tried to cover all of those subjects. So, we dealt with a bit of cryptography, taught them about hash functions, one-way functions, clock arithmetic, all of these things that are used in the cryptography of Bitcoin. And I think one lesson we learned is you have to keep it interactive. So as much as we covered the history of money, which is also something they understood pretty well, having, I think, known people in countries where currencies have collapsed, etc., it certainly sort of run quite true. And so we managed to teach everything in an interactive way, which is kind of the lesson we learned.
Did you do exams at the end of your 2-week courses?
Yeah, we had a fun little kind of multiple choice questions test at the end, which was great. But I think most of it was focusing on interactive exercises. For example, we've kind of developed this build your own blockchain game, where each of the students actually opens a hashing calculator for the mining algorithm for Bitcoin. And they get to see how the more people that are hashing, the more difficult it is to find the answer. We can adjust the difficulty, and then we paste all the blocks that they mine, and they actually get Bitcoin rewards, which they really enjoyed. So at the end of that, they kind of get a sense, just from experiencing it, how that distributed consensus works, how the game theory works, and they see it firsthand. And keeping it interactive, I think, is what kept their attention.
Plans to go back?
We're actually going back in November, because that school has actually doubled in size in the last 6 months. I mean, that's how strong the demand is. So we're going back to teach that, and we're actually teaching some other related subjects around computer science. I mean, so one of the things we did was we built a web page that accepts Bitcoin. Because, and this is something that students appreciate, they cannot actually build a website that accepts money. So if they're offering a service, selling maybe web development or selling items or something, they actually can't build an e-commerce site without permission. And their parents probably won't necessarily give them that. But with a permissionless system, they can actually accept payments, which is something they quite enjoyed. So yeah, we built HTML websites. It's something they haven't actually seen. I mean, you and I probably did that in high school, but it's surprising it's not really taught anymore. It's now all...
Well, it's all automated these days. It's Wix.com and WordPress, and just makes it simple.
So they see the front end, but I think HTML is a great introduction to coding. So we did that, and so this time that we're going to go back now in November, we'll be teaching some more in-depth subjects, and then also related to cryptocurrency. Now,
in those classes, did you find the math understanding to be adequate for topics like cryptography, some of the basic sort of principles behind Bitcoin, for instance?
Yeah, I think so. It was. I found in South African schools, the level is more reliable as to what you can expect. There was quite a difference between the students, but broadly, we did keep it at a high school level, so it wasn't that we were delving deep into like elliptic curves or tertiary subjects, which I mean, I think no high school would really know about. They're not actually taught cryptography in high school, but they've seen the Imitation Game, so they know Alan Turing.
They know the basics of the foundations of cryptography, I guess.
Yeah.
And I mean, high school is grade 8 to grade 12. I don't know what the Kenyan schooling system looks like. What was the difference in understanding and receptivity from a grade 8, say your middle of the road grade 8 student, to your middle of the road grade 12 student?
I think the younger they were, the less they had to unlearn. And that applies right through to financial professionals that we teach.
Yeah.
It's actually more difficult. They have a lot more to unlearn. A lot more things they take for granted.
Such as?
Well, I think, we kind of grow into a monetary system that hasn't really existed that long, and most people don't really know about the history of it. And most people haven't really seen those black swan inflationary events. And then often adults have got a skepticism because they've probably been exposed to a lot of financial scams. And at first glance, Bitcoin does look like a bit of a scam. Even the people that are completely into it now say, well, when they first heard about it, it seemed like a bit of an internet scam. In fact, I saw a story the other day about someone who went to write a book about why Bitcoin was a scam and ended up writing a book about why it was revolutionary. So the more they learn, I think the better. But that's a different starting point. When we teach adults and to some extent older children, you almost have to start off being apologetic and saying, let's explain why. First, let's get you to zero.
Okay.
Like why you should even consider this.
Okay.
Whereas with younger students, that's not the case at all. They're just very interested. And what we found to be universally true is by the end of the sessions that we've run, it's actually the existing system that they find more confusing. So we get questions like, well, when the government prints money, who mines it? Because they appreciate that you have to put in work, and that's what gives it value. So I think those concepts come through.
So you're giving them an entire economic framework, really, which all of a sudden, I mean, that's exactly what Bitcoin does to people. It makes them go, hang on a second, it makes them question the economics of society.
Absolutely. Really. I mean, I had to learn that stuff to teach it. So I actually didn't know about it. I didn't know when the first paper money came out. I didn't know the details about the gold-backed system, when it was reneged on in 1971. When Bretton Woods happened, what the historical climate was around that time. And also, the English word debase comes from putting base metals into coins.
Yeah. And
this temptation has existed for 2,000 years. The Roman emperors started with a 100% silver coin. 200 years later, and 5 emperors or so, they had gone down to about 40 to 60% on average for each coin. So, I didn't realize how long...
their coin clipping stage.
Yeah, I didn't know how long inflation had really been an issue. And even when it was metals that were required to be, have an inherent difficulty in mining or extracting, there were still tricks going on to inflate it.
Yeah. So let's come back to the way forward for CoinEd. I mean, you guys have now been to Kenya. I saw you were at a school this week. Is there a preference for you? Do you want to be doing international work? Do you want to be focusing on Africa? Is it students you want to be targeting? If you had a preference, what would that preference be?
So I think where we want to get to is a kind of teach the teacher model where they take on the syllabus, and we are actually talking to a number of schools about that. I think we've gotten to the point where we've honed the content now over the course of about a year, where I think we've got adequate content that's been tested on live audiences. So now the next step is to actually start to introduce it to teachers. Of course, that's difficult because you take for granted how much you actually have to know to be able to teach cryptocurrency. But we've identified a few champions in different schools, and they will essentially be able to take over and license the content, because that way we can reach as many people as possible. I mean, I'd love to 5 years from now tell the story, or 10 years from now, when hopefully if we've gone through what might be a very tumultuous road with crypto in the future. There's so much uncertainty. But if it does reach its potential, enabling a degree of financial freedom, or banking the unbanked, or a reliable store of value for people who need it, it'll be great to say that we were teaching thousands of students who are now university level or working, who are using it. I mean, that would really be good to look back on.
You guys are just a partnership, am I right? It's just you and Kriyan Singh?
Yeah, so we have a few investors in the business, and
that business being CoinEd, not just BlockStarters, or in essence are the two one and the same?
They're not really one and the same. So, I mean, they're very different models.
Sure, no, I understand that.
Yeah.
But are they different partners?
Yeah, it's different people involved in it. So, BlockStarters is more of a space that we have. Valor, which is a South African exchange, are one of the tenants there, and we really use it as a way to run events. So even things slightly outside of cryptocurrency, we host the Pi Data meetup there, for instance, but then we try and link it to crypto. So we hosted an event there where we use GPU mining rigs to do machine learning as a second use case. We have also run an event that's been quite successful called the Blockchain Breakfast. So it used to run every 2 weeks, but we found it was a bit onerous to organize it that often with unique guests every time. So we run it once a month now, Friday mornings, once a month we do an event. I think the next one we're going to do is on exchange control. We've previously had topics around tax, crypto tax from lawyers at firms like Bowman. Exchange control will be Cliff Decker. So we've got some interesting players looking at this. And I think also people get the sense that there are some bigger players, bigger firms that are starting to investigate this, and we just want to be found by the community. So if a law firm wants to do a blockchain trial, they'll kind of find us and we can help them out with it and lead them in the right direction.
Continuing with the track of BlockStarters, I love the model of incubating blockchain startups. I think a huge sort of success story for you right now is that Valor is based at BlockStarters. What's the goal? What's the sort of USP, the ultimate selling point of BlockStarters?
So I think although we have experimented a bit with the incubation model, we've actually found that it's been more successful as a community hub and a way to essentially get leads into other businesses, or just generally knowing who's in the blockchain community, a place to engage with regulators that's neutral. I think generally my view on incubation and venture capital in South Africa, the climate isn't really great for it. There's economies of scale that exist in other places in the world that are difficult to compete with globally. And ultimately, if you're building a crypto product, unless it's an exchange, or maybe a handful of others, you are competing globally. If you're running a mining business, or you're building a wallet, or you are competing globally, it's very tough in our capital environments where there isn't much deal flow. It's a problem of all software companies in South Africa. And I think anyone that knows people that have raised funding here, it is quite difficult. So I think incubating a niche within a difficult market, we've experimented with a bit, but we haven't actually engaged with that. So in terms of Valor, they're really are at the space as tenants and engage with the community. So we get them to help us out with a lot of the talks. And then just try and support. So it's a way to link projects together.
Yeah.
For us, it's not really about taking an equity stake in these businesses. I kind of alluded to the engagement with regulators, which I think is important, and that's for me going to be a very important function of BlockStarters. For example, we've dealt with the Reserve Bank a number of times. So I think if anyone wants to run a trial, like maybe put down ATMs, there are currently laws and grey areas around what that actually means. If you're a bank and you want to put down an ATM, you have to have a huge amount of compliance around that. At the moment, you can import and drop down a BTM or crypto ATM without necessarily anything like that, but you might find later that you could end up in trouble. You could, for whatever reason, fall under scrutiny. So those kinds of trials, we'd actually rather engage with regulators. And if anyone wants to, then we can at least open those channels. And the Reserve Bank's been pretty good at, they're running their own blockchain experiments. And likewise, we'd actually like to open channels with SARS, maybe even in the future, for people that do want to understand and get clarity. I think that two-way street to understand what are the problems in reporting. It is incredibly vague at the moment.
Sure. Do you have any inroads into legislative government, parliamentary level government officials? Because, dealing with SARB can be quite different to dealing with parliamentarians, for instance.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, it is quite different. We don't really have leads within the lawmaking process or legislation. So I suppose that would be the next step. I think it'll probably be the likes of SARS and SARB that deal with crypto first. I think it'll be a while before it becomes an issue that's being tabled the way it is in Congress in the US right now. I think South Africa is a while off of its reaching that level. As much as we probably one of the most popular countries in the world for Bitcoin, if Google searches anything to go by. In fact, we're the most popular. But I just think that the amount of capital here, and even the taxable gains on crypto, are probably smaller than some individual cases in the entire country.
It's a very interesting time. Well, Warren, thanks so much. I know you've got to run. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate you making the time to come through and visit us here in Durbs. Where can people find out more about you? What's the websites?
Yeah, so you can get us on BlockStarters.com. And CoinEd.co.za.
Okay, BlockStarters.com.
Yeah.
And CoinEd. And you are active on Twitter?
Yeah, so we have Twitter accounts.
Or a better question would be, where are you most active?
I think Twitter probably is where we're most active. So you can get those Twitter links on our web pages.
Cool.
I think we've got the social media stuff at the bottom.
Cool.
Reach out to us there, and we'd love to do some more courses at schools or in businesses.
Nice, man. Well, Warren, thanks so much. We appreciate your time, and we'll certainly be in touch because you're an active member on the SA Crypto WhatsApp groups, and looking forward to finally coming and visiting you up in Joburg eventually, and wishing you all the best ahead of Crypto Fest in September and for the rest of the year, man.
Cool, let's do a follow-up when you're in Jersey.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thanks, Warren.
Great, thank you.
That's where we'll leave it for this edition, folks. From me, James Preston, and the SA Crypto team, it's goodbye.
SA Crypto, South Africa's largest blockchain community and news outlet.